The night that changed everything didn't start with shouting. It began with laughter. I still remember the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon candles drifting through my son's house. My house, really, though they hadn't called it that in years. It was Christmas Eve, and the place looked like one of those holiday commercials. Soft music, golden lights, my grandkids in matching sweaters, everyone smiling for pictures that would be posted online before the night was even over. Before we continue, stay tuned by liking and subscribing to the video. I had work that morning at the auto shop, same as I had for the last 25 years. Grease under my nails, ache in my knees, but I'd promised to be there for dinner. I carried a store-bought pie, the only thing they'd let me bring anymore. "Don't worry about cooking, Dad," my son, Evan, had said. "We've got it handled." I took that as kindness. It wasn't. When I walked in, my daughter-in-law, Megan, barely looked up from her phone. "Hi, Alexander," she said, voice clipped. "Coats go in the hall closet." It was my coat closet once. I built that thing with my own hands when Evan was still in high school. But I smiled, hung my jacket, and told myself not to start anything. Not tonight. The kids ran up, little Sophie and Jack, their faces bright, arms wrapping around my legs. For a second, everything felt normal again. Then Evan's voice came from the dining room. "Dad, we're just about to start. Hurry up before the food gets cold." I followed the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. The table was set beautifully. Gold plates, tall candles, a ham glistening in the center. There was only one empty seat left, right beside the kids. My seat, I assumed. The same place I'd always sat. I reached for the back of the chair and started to lower myself. Then Evan pulled it out from under me. The fall was quick, but felt like slow motion. My knees buckled, my back hit the hardwood, and the sound of plates clattering filled the silence that followed. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Evan's voice, calm and almost annoyed. "Dad, that seat's for Megan's father. Can you grab a stool from the kitchen?" He didn't look at me when he said it, just went back to carving the ham. I sat there on the floor, palms stinging, the laughter around me slowly restarting like someone pressing play again. The kids froze, eyes wide. Megan covered her mouth, hiding a smirk. No one helped me up. I pushed myself to my feet, every bone in my body protesting. "Sure," I said quietly. "Of course." I turned toward the kitchen, and as I walked away, I heard Megan whisper, "He's so dramatic." I stood in that kitchen for a long minute, staring at the wall clock ticking above the sink. My reflection in the window looked tired, older than 62, older than I'd ever felt before. For years I'd told myself the tension between us was normal. Families change, kids grow up, parents step back. But that moment, the look in Evan's eyes, told me something different. I wasn't a father anymore. I was an inconvenience. I sat on the wooden stool, staring at the empty chair visible through the doorway, the one that used to be mine, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like part of the family dinner. I felt like a stranger intruding on someone else's celebration. When Megan's father arrived 10 minutes later, Evan jumped up to greet him. "Dad, this is Frank. He's basically family now," Evan said proudly. They laughed, shaking hands over the table I'd built 20 years ago. I sipped my water and watched. And something inside me, something quiet and patient, snapped. After dinner, while everyone moved to the living room for presents, I slipped into the guest room, my room, the one they gave me when I sold my house and moved in to be closer to the kids. That was their phrasing. In truth, I'd sold the house to help Evan with a down payment for this one. I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the muffled sound of laughter from the other side of the wall. Frank's deep chuckle, Megan's giggle, Evan's voice carrying over the music. It should have hurt. But instead, my mind went still, cold, almost clear. For the first time in months, maybe years, I started thinking, not as a father desperate for approval, but as a man who'd had enough. I took out my old phone and started scrolling through saved emails, mortgage documents, transaction records, proof of the money I'd given them. proof that my name was still quietly attached to certain things they thought were theirs. I found the one that mattered most, a copy of the property transfer Evan had promised to finalize years ago, but never did. My name was still on the deed. Technically, legally, half of that house was still mine. A wave of something hot and dangerous rolled through me. Not rage, resolve. They thought they'd humiliated me. They thought they'd buried me under gratitude and guilt. But I still had one thing left: leverage. I closed the email, turned off the phone, and sat there in the dark listening to their laughter fade into the night. I wasn't planning revenge, not yet. I was remembering who I was. The next morning, sunlight leaked through the blinds. Megan had already left for her morning yoga class. Evan was in the driveway, scraping frost off his car. I watched from the window as he scrolled through his phone, looking relaxed, as if last night had never happened. I walked into the kitchen. The pie I'd brought sat untouched on the counter. He looked up when he saw me. "Hey, Dad. Sorry about the chair last night. You know how it is. Big family dinner, limited space." "It's your house," I said. "You do what you want." He smiled like he'd won something. "Glad you understand." I did understand. Just not in the way he thought. When he left for work, I sat at the kitchen table, pie still in front of me, and made a list on the back of an envelope. Things I still owned. Things they had taken. Things they thought I'd forgotten. By the time I finished, the list was longer than I expected. Not material things, trust, respect, dignity, but those were harder to steal quietly. I folded the paper and slipped it into my wallet. Not as a keepsake, as a reminder. From that moment, I stopped being the unwanted guest in my own life, and started being something else entirely. Someone they shouldn't have underestimated. When people talk about betrayal, they imagine shouting matches, slammed doors, maybe broken plates. But the real kind, the kind that seeps into your bones, happens in silence. It's not one moment. It's a slow unraveling. The morning after Christmas, I woke before the sun. The house was still. From the hallway, I could hear the faint sound of Evan snoring upstairs. The same man who once crawled into my bed during thunderstorms now slept soundly under a roof I helped him buy, a roof that had become my prison. I made coffee quietly and sat at the kitchen table. Steam curled from the mug like smoke from a small fire, and that's exactly what I was now. A small fire waiting to spread. 3 days passed before I spoke to Evan again. When I finally did, it was because Megan left a note on the counter that said, "Dad, can you please make yourself scarce this evening? We're having guests." Make yourself scarce, as if I were a noise to be turned off. I went to my room and stayed there. I heard them laughing with their friends in the living room, the one I wasn't allowed to enter that night. Every laugh felt like a hammer on my chest. But I stayed calm, observing, listening. When their guests left, I heard Megan say, "He's so stubborn. Why can't he just move into a retirement community or something?" Evan's voice followed. "He will eventually. He just needs a push." A push. That's what my own son said about me. The next morning I went to the town library. It was quiet, the kind of place where no one asked questions. I sat at a computer and typed property co-ownership rights. An hour turned into 2, then 3. By noon I had a folder full of printed documents, property law, power of attorney rules, how to legally transfer ownership. Knowledge, I realized, was its own kind of weapon, and I'd just found my first blade. I bought a cheap file organizer at the dollar store and started collecting everything. Bank records, emails, even old texts. Every paper was a piece of a puzzle they didn't know I was solving. That night I made dinner for myself, grilled cheese and soup, and ate in silence while the family ordered takeout in the next room. I heard Megan telling Evan about vacation plans for the summer. She said, "We should use the cabin next to Dad's lake house. We'll have more space once your father moves out." They were already planning my absence. I looked at my reflection in the dark window and smiled faintly. Let them think I was weak. That was part of the plan now. Over the next 2 weeks, things shifted. Small things, but enough to notice. My coffee mug disappeared from the cupboard. My chair in the living room was replaced with a new one. And one morning, my toolbox, the one that I'd had since I was 20, was gone. When I asked him about it, he shrugged. We needed space in the garage. Megan sold it online. I'll get you a new one. I nodded slowly. Don't bother. That one's gone forever. He didn't hear the double meaning in my words, but I did. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed holding an old photo of Evan as a kid. His hand was gripping mine, both of us smiling at the camera. I remember thinking back then that my son would never hurt anyone. But people change. And sometimes they need to lose everything before they remember who they were. 2 weeks later, the opportunity presented itself. Evan and Megan were out at a friend's party. The kids were asleep. The house was mine for the night. I went into the study, Evan's office. Inside, I found what I needed: unopened mail, insurance documents, overdue notices, and a letter marked "Final Warning, Mortgage Delinquent." My hands went still. So that was it. They were drowning, and I was the lifeboat they'd chained themselves to. But instead of bailing them out again, I took photos of every document. Each click of my phone camera sounded like justice. They'd been using me to keep their lifestyle afloat. Now, they'd learn what it meant to sink. The next day, Evan sat at the breakfast table looking stressed. "Dad," he started, "we might need to refinance the mortgage. The rates went up and things are tight right now." "Things are always tight. What happened to that raise you got last year?" He sighed. "That barely covered the car payments. Listen, you've still got some savings, right? Maybe we can use that temporarily." There it was, the quiet assumption that my money existed for his mistakes. "I'll think about it," I said. But I didn't think. I decided. That afternoon, I moved my remaining savings, what little I had left, to a private account under a new bank. I updated my will, contacted an attorney, and scheduled a consultation. By the time the sun set, everything of mine was protected. The next time they reached for my wallet, it would be empty. And the next time they reached for power, I'd already taken it back. The tension in the house thickened. Megan stopped pretending to be polite. Evan grew short-tempered, snapping at the kids, muttering about bills, about me. "Dad's too stubborn," I heard him say one night. "He just doesn't understand how hard things are." I smiled in the dark. Oh, I understood perfectly. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control. They wanted the house, the freedom, and the illusion that they'd earned it all themselves. They didn't realize yet that they were living on borrowed time and borrowed property. A week later, Megan's father came over for dinner again, the man who had taken my seat. I greeted him with a handshake that lingered a little too long. "Frank," I said, smiling, "how's your health these days?" He blinked. "Good, I suppose. Why?" "No reason," I said softly, "just making conversation." He chuckled nervously and joined the family at the table. I took my stool at the kitchen counter. From there, I could see everything. The false laughter, the smug smiles, the way Evan looked at me like I was the ghost of someone he used to respect. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "People like them think respect is inherited. They're about to learn it's earned." By February, the silence had turned to open hostility. Megan started locking the pantry. Evan took my truck without asking. The kids stopped coming to my room at night for bedtime stories. And I, the man who built the foundation beneath their feet, became invisible. Until the morning, Megan pushed too far. I came downstairs to find her rearranging the living room. My old recliner, the one I'd spent years sitting in with a beer after work, was halfway out the door. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Oh," she said sweetly, "we're donating it. It doesn't fit the new decor." "That's my chair." Her smile didn't falter. "Not anymore." I didn't say another word. I just helped her carry it outside. Not because I agreed,
but because I wanted her to believe she'd won. You see, the best revenge doesn't start with shouting. It starts with silence. And that silence was almost over. That night, while they slept, I sat at the kitchen table under the soft hum of the refrigerator and wrote one sentence on a clean page. You took my seat. Now I'll take back everything else. I folded the page, slipped it into my pocket, and looked around the quiet house. Their laughter, their arrogance, their greed, they'd turned my home into a cage. But I had the key, and I was ready to use it. It isn't grand gestures that break a person's will. It's the steady drip, the accumulation of small, undeniable facts that once arranged into a line begin to take form. That's how I planned it. Slow, unavoidable, legal, and clean. No melodrama, no theatrics, just the law and truth laid out like a map. I spent the first week of my campaign like a man assembling a watch. Careful, precise, patient. The things that had been taken from me were mostly invisible. Respect, autonomy, dignity, those weren't on any inventory list. But there were other things they had taken that were very much tangible. Unpaid utilities, unsigned promises, bank statements that never bore their names, receipts for things I'd bought that had vanished from my home the day boxes started to appear. Those were the gears I needed. My first move was the office of a lawyer I found online after 2 afternoons at the public library. The woman at the desk wore a navy suit and an expression that said she'd seen the worst and still showed up. Her assistant led me into a glass-walled room with a potted ficus that looked older than both of us. Her name was Rachel Mercer. She specialized in elder rights and property disputes, and she asked one question that cut to the bone. Do you want to humiliate them, or do you want a clean result that puts you back where you belong? I said clean. I had imagined yelling, scenes, a confrontation that would satisfy some theatrical hunger. Instead, I wanted the house to be mine again, legally, peacefully, without the rancor of revenge turning ugly. Rachel smiled, in a way that felt like relief. She asked for documents. I brought everything. Deed copies with my name still present, emails where Evan promised to remove my name and never did, bank statements showing months and years without rent payments, receipts for things I'd bought that had vanished from my home the day boxes started to appear. I also brought a small digital recorder and a notebook filled with dates and times, a chronological tapestry of small cruelties. Rachel read, nodded, and drafted a plan. She said, first, we serve a notice, a 30-day written demand to vacate. We do it properly, so there's no technical loophole for them to crawl through. If they refuse, we file an unlawful inductor. The process can take 6 to 8 weeks from start to finish if they contest it. But based on what you've shown me, if they haven't paid a dime in rent, the law should be on your side. And the other thing? I asked. The other thing is to protect the asset. I recommend a revocable trust, transfer of title with you as trustee and a beneficiary of your choosing. It means you control the house now and after. It prevents future disputes over inheritance and sends a message. This property will not be exploited. It felt strange hearing the word trust used like a shield. I thought of the cabin down by the lake where I learned to fix a motor, and the veterans shelter that had taken me in decades ago when I first came home from the service. Part of me wanted to hand everything to them, to the people who hadn't pretended to be family when I needed them. But Rachel advised caution. Let's get you secure now. We can talk about beneficiaries after. 2 weeks later, the notice was drafted and returned with red type and small legalese that made the letter look like an instrument of finality. Rachel's office staff printed 3 copies, notarized a signature I gave them in her presence, and arranged service through a private process server. I felt an odd blend of guilt and exhilaration at the neat stack of paper in my hand. This was the sort of event movies make loud. Envelope, knock, and then collapse. But in reality, it would be mostly forms, dates, and a courtroom. While Rachel handled the legal side, I built my evidence like a quiet army. I set the recorder to run when I left the house in the morning and stopped it when I returned. Not to entrap, but to protect myself against manipulation. I recorded conversations where my medication bottles moved mysteriously to the pantry and then to the living room, timestamps marking each relocation. I documented nights when the thermostat was turned up while I slept downstairs and then blamed on forgetfulness. I photographed items that had been taken. My old leather recliner with a small rip only I knew about. The antique drill with the initials carved into its handle. I collected testimony. Margaret, from 2 houses down, agreed to write a short statement after I told her how the kids had seemed taught to ignore me. She was a widow and blunt. She'd watched the dynamic for years and had seen the shift firsthand. And then there was the biggest piece, their finances. I didn't want to break into anything. I simply walked the path any adult should be allowed. I reviewed the household's public records and notices I'd found tucked in Evan's office. The missing payments, the collections notices, the insurance lapse, each document spoke with the flat, cold voice of facts. I had enough to show a pattern. A household living beyond its means, leveraging a man's generosity as if it were an endless credit line. When the process server arrived on a Tuesday, I watched from the kitchen window as he walked up the front steps and rang the bell. I felt the weight of it like a hand in my chest. Megan answered with that practiced smile she used for everyone who had no idea what was happening. The server handed her the papers. She read, brow furrowing. Evan came out of the hallway, pulled the paper from her. "What is this?" he demanded. "A notice," Megan said. He served us." Evan's face changed in a way I'd never seen. It wasn't anger. It was recognition of consequence. For years, he'd assumed there would always be a soft landing. That evening, he paced the kitchen with the letter in his hand like a hot coal. He tried calls, frantic messages, coaxing and angered threats blended into the low hum of his phone. I kept my face calm.
I had decided to let the legal machine, not my temper, do the work. Over the next day, he called his father, mine, and his sister, trying to marshal a chorus to my doorstep. They came over, sat on my patio, pretending concern. The old family scripts played in their voices. "He's our dad. He's always been stubborn. Maybe there's a misunderstanding." But Rachel anticipated this. She filed a copy of the notice with the court the same week, time-stamped and in order. Then Evan filed a response. Marcus Webb, a small-time attorney he'd found online, wrote back asking for more time, claiming an oral agreement, claiming hardship, trying to create delay. It was what the law allowed. Stalling tactics are a standard defense. But there was no written agreement, and we had records. I'd taken the precaution to get my paperwork in order. Rachel was a master of slow pressure. "Let them talk," she advised. "Words won't win in court when there's paper." And still, despite the logic of it, I felt something else, a hunger that surprised me. I had expected relief, maybe a quiet satisfaction. Instead, each tiny victory tasted like a hollow echo until I saw the change in Evan's eyes. He started to look smaller. He would come home late, linger in the driveway as if rehearsing a speech. He stared up at the porch sometimes, hands gripping the steering wheel of his car, and then drive away. One night, when the house had gone to sleep, I sat at my desk and wrote 10 questions I wanted him to answer. I didn't intend to read them aloud. They were for myself. When did you first decide my life could be background noise? When did you stop listening? Who taught you that taking is the same as owning? When did you stop seeing me as your father? I folded that paper and tucked it into the file with the deed. I wanted to remember who I'd been when I started the fight, so I could see if I had changed into someone I'd later regret. As February boiled into March, tensions rose. There were small acts of pettiness, groceries that showed up at the curb, bills with strange late charges, my favorite mug cracked and then accidentally thrown away. I documented everything, and each small cruelty added to a dossier that made a clear line from abuse to exploitation. Neighbors started to look at me differently. Where before I'd been the old man at the corner who mowed his lawn, now I was the man who'd taken action. A few nodded politely when they saw me at the grocery. One woman, Jenna from across the street, offered me a casserole and a look that said she'd always suspected something was wrong. Her husband, a retired cop, told me, quietly, that courts hate surprises, they love structure. It felt like the town itself had become an ally. I began to contribute to the house in other ways too, not because they deserved it, but because I wanted the house to remain lived in and cared for. I fixed a leaky faucet that Megan had ignored for weeks. I mowed the lawn one damp afternoon and left the mower neatly stored. I did small, quiet things to prove I was still capable of tending the place, to deny their narrative that I'd become useless. Rachel said to do it. It was part of the strategy. Show competence. In court, optics matter, fact patterns matter, and evidence, clear, clean, irrefutable, matters most of all. Then came the day the sheriff's deputy showed up. It was official now. The deputy handed me the notice confirming the court date. I read the small type. Unlawful detention hearing, April 20th. The calendar in my kitchen seemed to blink. I felt the air shapes of the coming weeks, trials, testimony, people leaning forward in wooden benches. I felt the weight of my son's face when I'd tell the story, and the weight of the room when a judge would decide if a man who owned his home could reclaim it. Evan found me on the porch, staring at the mail. The color had drained from his face. "Dad," he said, voice raw, "please, we can work this out. I'll get a job, Megan will get a job. Give us a chance. Don't do this." I looked at him, at the boy who'd scraped his knee on my driveway and then grown into the man who now leaned on my patience. "You had your chance," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It was the sound of age meeting resolve. "You had 3 years." He bowed his head, the first sign of raw human surrender I'd seen in months. He turned and walked away. I watched him go, feeling that strange combination of triumph and ache. This wasn't about cruelty. This was about consequence. I slept poorly the week before the hearing. Not because I doubted the case, Rachel had dotted every I and crossed every T, but because the real fight was never legal. It was emotional. Could I stand in a courtroom and look at my son while laying bare the slow erosion he had imposed? Could I show the judge the recorded conversations and the evidence that painted him as someone who took advantage of his parent? The thought of it tightened my chest. On the morning of the court date, I dressed carefully in my best jacket. Not to show off, but because I wanted to present the version of myself that was steady, not embittered. Rachel met me at the courthouse, her step sufficient, her grip firm when she shook my hand. We walked into a building of pale stone and echoing hallways, the kind of place that smells faintly of old paper and polished wood, where time slows down and voices take on a more serious timbre. When the bailiff called our case, I felt my heart beat in my throat. Evan and Megan sat together, hands clasped. Megan's face was pale, mascara smudged. Marcus Webb looked smaller than his online photo. I felt no pleasure in seeing them humbled, only a deep, quiet satisfaction that I'd followed the path of law rather than anger. The judge, a woman with silver hair and a voice like tempered glass, read the filings. Marcus argued desperation, pleading for time, for mercy. Rachel stood and presented the document trail. She laid out the dates, the photographs, the bank statements, Margaret's written statement, and the audio files that captured the small manipulations they'd used. It was a tidy, surgical presentation. I spoke last. I did not yell. I did not beg. I told the truth simply. I was not evicting out of spite. I was reclaiming my life. I recited dates. I explained patterns. I spoke of small humiliations stacked into a mountain. I kept my voice steady, and watched reactions in the room. When the judge delivered her ruling, it was not a theatrical verdict. It was a clean, measured sentence of law. Judgment for the petitioner. 30 days to vacate. The gavel tapped once, a small sound that echoed like a final stitch being sewn. I felt something uncoil inside me. Relief, yes, but not the gloating relief I'd imagined. It was the relief of a man who had been heard. They left that day in a fog of anger and shame. Neighbors watched. Some offered quiet nods as they passed my yard. The house settled back into its bones. For the first time in years, I walked through it and felt the familiar hum of belonging. And yet, as the car pulled away down our street, a part of me understood that this victory was not the end. There would be consequences I hadn't foreseen. There would be calls in the night, attempts to sabotage, maybe even legal wrangling I hadn't imagined. I sat on the front porch after they'd gone and watched the sunlight climb over the roofline, feeling older and lighter all at once. Then my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I answered. A voice I recognized, low, strained, said 2 words. Watch yourself. I looked up, scanning the street. Empty. I told myself it was an angry reaction, the kind that passes and withers. But the sound of those 2 words sat in my chest like an ember. I understood in an instant that winning the legal war was only one battle. The war, it seemed, had many fronts. When people imagine revenge, they picture an explosion, one blinding, fiery moment that settles every score. But the truth, it's quieter than that. Revenge doesn't end with noise. It ends with understanding. The silence after. The week after the court ruling felt eerily peaceful. Evan and Megan moved like ghosts through the house. No shouting, no mocking laughter, no slammed doors. Only boxes. Boxes everywhere. The sound of tape peeling and cardboard closing became the new rhythm of the home.
The grandkids avoided my eyes. They didn't understand what was happening, only that the grown-ups were angry in a way that made Christmas lights feel colder. I tried to stay out of their way. I'd done enough damage for now, at least in their eyes. But truthfully, I wasn't angry anymore. I'd already won. April 15th, the deadline. The morning sunlight spilled through the kitchen windows, golden and still. Evan was pacing in the living room, clutching a key ring, my old house key dangling among his. "Dad," he said finally, his voice shaking. I just want to say, I'm sorry." It sounded rehearsed, fragile, maybe even sincere. But I'd learned not to trust words said under pressure. I looked up from my coffee mug. "Are you sorry for what you did, or sorry for losing?" He froze, then sighed. "I'm sorry for both." That answer caught me off guard. It wasn't the apology I'd wanted, but it was something. He turned the key ring in his hand, removed my key, and set it on the counter. "Guess this belongs to you again," he said quietly. It always did. Megan appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. But I'd seen those tears before, the kind meant for an audience. This time, they didn't work. "Alexander, you're tearing this family apart," she cried. I met her gaze. "No, I'm just taking back what's mine." Evan grabbed a box and walked out without another word. By noon, the house was empty. For the first time in years, every room was silent, truly silent. No music, no footsteps, no disrespect hidden beneath fake smiles. Just me. And peace. The calls began that night. First one, then another, then 10. Evan's number lit up my phone again and again until the screen showed 52 missed calls. He didn't leave a message until the last one. "Dad, please. We're in a small apartment. The boys miss you. Megan's out of work.
I can't keep up with the bills. Please, just talk to me." I listened once, then deleted it. For weeks, the calls continued. Apologies, excuses, promises. But I didn't respond, because this wasn't about anger anymore. It was about consequence. They needed to feel what it meant to live without the safety net they'd abused. A month passed, then another. One afternoon in June, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, I found Albert, Megan's father, the man who'd taken my seat that night, standing there. "Alexander, mind if I come in?" I nodded, stepping aside. He looked around the house, eyes scanning the furniture, the empty dining table, the quiet. "You've kept it up well. Cleaner than they ever did." "Old habits," I replied. He sighed, removed his cap, and sat down across from me. "They're struggling," he said. "Evan's working long shifts. Megan's barely hanging on. The boys, they ask about you." I stayed silent. "I'm not here to take sides," Albert continued. "You were right to do what you did. They used you. They needed to learn, but the boys, they didn't." Something inside me shifted. I hadn't thought much about the kids lately, too focused on reclaiming peace. But hearing their names again, I felt that old warmth flicker in my chest. Albert must have seen the look in my eyes because he smiled slightly. "They're good kids, Alexander. They just miss their grandpa." 2 weeks later, I met them. Not here at my house, but at Albert's. When I arrived, the boys ran to me instantly. Sophie, now 9, clung to my arm. Jack, smaller, looked up with tearful eyes. "Grandpa, Mom said you were mad at us." I knelt down to their level. "I could never be mad at you. I just needed some time to think." We spent the afternoon together. Pizza, board games, laughter. For the first time in a long while, I laughed without bitterness. When it was time to leave, Jack hugged me tightly. "Will he see you again?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "You will." And I meant it. That night back home, I sat on the porch front with a cup of lemonade. The sun was setting over the rooftops of our small town, painting the sky orange and pink. I thought about everything that had happened. The fall, the humiliation, the court battles, the silence that followed. I wanted revenge. I wanted them to feel what I'd felt. And they did. But revenge isn't about making others suffer. It's about reclaiming your own peace after the storm. They had taken my seat at the table. Not just literally, but symbolically. Now I sat in my own chair again. My home, my life, my peace. Late August. I was trimming the hedges in the front yard when a car pulled up quietly across the street. Evan's car. He didn't get out right away, just sat there, staring at the house. Finally, he stepped out, walked halfway up the driveway, then stopped. "Dad," he said softly. I didn't speak. He took a deep breath. "I just wanted to see you. I know you probably hate me, but I get it now. I really do." I could tell from his voice. He wasn't lying. He wasn't the arrogant man from Christmas night. He was broken, humbled, maybe even changed. I didn't move closer, but I didn't turn away either. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "Just wanted you to know. I'm sorry. For real this time." Then he turned, walked back to his car, and drove away. And that was enough. Peace restored. Months passed. The call stopped. The silence became natural, comforting. I fixed the porch swing, repainted the fence, replanted the rose bushes my late wife used to love. The house felt lighter, not because it was emptier, but because it was mine again. One evening, as the sun set behind the neighborhood, I sat on that porch swing with the same glass of lemonade I'd had that night months before. The air smelled of grass and honeysuckle. Somewhere, a child laughed. I smiled to myself. They say revenge is best served cold, but I think they're wrong. Revenge is best served quietly, when you've already moved on, and the only sound left is peace. Epilogue. Sometimes I still think about that Christmas dinner, about the chair pulled out from under me, the humiliation that started it all. And then I think about where I am now. A house filled with silence, sunlight spilling through the windows, the laughter of my grandkids at touring on weekends. That's the real victory. Not the eviction, not the legal win, but the peace that came after. Because in the end, revenge isn't about destroying others, it's about rebuilding yourself. If you like the video, please like and subscribe our channel.